Welcome back to the 76 Capital Sports Leadership Show. My name is Wayne Kimmel, managing partner of 76 Capital and host of this podcast. My guest on this episode is Ken Shropshire. Ken is a strategic partner here at 76 Capital, and this is going to be a really exciting episode. Ken is the top professor across the business of sports. He literally wrote the book on the business of sports almost 40 years ago and founded the sports business program at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. He's a Stanford and Columbia Law graduate. He's worked across law, the Olympics, the global sports world while serving on the boards of companies like Moelis. Ken, welcome back to the 76 Capital Sports Leadership Show.
Hey, Wayne, I feel like I never went away. We're always talking, so I'm happy to do this with other people listening.
I mean, you've been a special co-host, so it's like coming back. You're part of it. You're part of the whole team at 76. It's really exciting to have you as part of all of everything that we're doing here at 76. And I've always wanted to ask you this question about the book that you originally wrote, about the business of sports, and what spurred you on to do that and really build your whole career around the business of sports.
It's interesting. So the first book I actually wrote was about sports agents. So it was about the business of sports agents. And believe it or not, there was a whole question about amateurism and should college athletes be amateurism. And the name of the book was Agents of Opportunity. So this whole idea of the opportunity that agents had to get in the lives of these athletes. So shortly after that, I wrote it was sort of a collection of the best articles on sports law with a couple other guys. And it wasn't too long after that this whole idea of there needed to be a strong reader, a strong collection of the best on sports business and giving people an idea of how to understand, how to think about, much like you start talking about sports as an asset class, the idea of thinking about sports in this full business context and not just this, it's games and maybe it's business sometimes and family owned businesses and all that sort of stuff. So this to me and it wasn't quite 40 years ago, maybe that old, but 30 plus years ago, the idea of really transitioning to think about it. In a lot of schools, for example, as you kind of point out, we're starting to make sports business a real class and not just something that was added on as this funny like tip. So that was really the timing of it all. And we're actually, along with my longtime colleague, Columbia University's Scott Rosner, we're actually working on a new edition for those who've been waiting impatiently for it to come out of the book.
Well, that's exciting. I mean, Scott's, part of your I guess it's called your coaching tree or your teaching tree or whatever that's called. But it's amazing to see what he's done at Columbia and so many others that have come through your world.
There are a lot. I mean, just by longevity. I tell people, you want to be successful in sports business, just stay at it for the long haul. Just don't pull out of it. Don't get away from it. So many people kind of fleet in and out of the sports business and don't give it a chance. So yeah, I've had, as you say, 40 years of students. I mean, people at a lot of different places. He was I think of it just a kid, just because something was in the news recently. Royce Cohen at the Dodgers, and I watched this kid who came into my office, and I think Scott might have been in there at the time, and he wanted to be involved in sports, and now he's big, one of the big drivers with Stan Kasten of the Dodgers, of the Professional Women's Hockey League. Started doing all this stuff, but that story repeats itself over and over again. I just wish I could get some of the money that some of these guys are making that have and women too. Let me be clear that it's just amazing to watch the success there, and with other organizations too. I was for a long time on the board of the Women's Sports Foundation in some of its years when it was struggling financially, and was able to work with Billie Jean King and Ilana, her wife, figuring out how do we better make this organization work. And now they've gone on personally to greater business success than they've had, and they are the beacon in this moment of women's sports. The engine that's there that you don't often see. The Women's Sports Foundation was always there.
Well, you've been a driver and certainly and you've inspired so many people to want to go into this industry. You think about where it was and where it is today, and how sports is just continuing to become such a big part of the overall global economy. Did you envision this? That it was going to become this big and such a big part of all of our lives.
No, no, and I'll go back even further. Grew up in LA, just loved to play sports. I have an older brother who was kind of led the way with that. And interestingly, so my wife, who's the along with my son, are probably the best athletes in the family. Um, we both grew up in the Crenshaw district of LA. Um, and at the time, the streets weren't called this, but she grew up playing tennis and I grew up playing football. I don't think you and I have ever talked about this. On the corner of, it literally is now the corner of Martin Luther King and Obama. That's Obama Boulevard. And I played football in the stadium that's actually called Jackie Robinson Stadium now. She grew up in a park that is now named after Venus and Serena Williams. Now, two kids growing up in that city, and we're both middle class kids. They're not like there's some great ghetto story, but this was a black community where our aspiration was to play sport. And to get to your question, I only reason I ended up getting involved in the business and legal side of sport. I fortunate enough to get a football scholarship to Stanford. I'm going to the NFL. I mean, I'm not thinking about Stanford as this great university. Um, what I was thinking about at the time was, I would go there, play, go to the NFL, and be a broadcaster once I'm done. Well, as these things happened pretty early on, it became clear that I was gonna play for 4 years, a lot, but most of my playing was gonna be holding bags and kind of standing on the sideline for others. So I started looking for other ways to be involved in sport, and it was at that time that people like, I mean, Lee Steinberg was in his heyday. People were lawyers were representing athletes. I said, well, that's something I could do and still be in this business. But even then, I mean, think about that. If that's as big as I could think in that moment. I mean, I wasn't thinking about owning a team. I certainly wasn't thinking about maybe private equity, and that way I can involve in investing in sport, or even being in what was not yet Silicon Valley. The idea of as we're involved in sports tech. I mean, that phrase didn't exist. Um, so no, I never thought that there would be this level of engagement beyond the idea of playing, beyond the idea of representing athletes, but the whole levels that we talk about sport as an asset class, the idea of ownership in sports, the idea of sports tech. There's so much that didn't exist that there weren't these phrasings didn't even exist. I mean, where there were sports owners, but beyond that, none of this stuff that we talk about writ large existed when I first started thinking about, okay, everybody can't play the game. What else can you do?
Well, so you've been in the middle of so many incredible conversations, organizations that have really helped develop sports to where it is today. When you think back to some of those different conversations, which probably a lot of it, I'm assuming, inform you of how you now, when you work with companies and advise them and sit on boards of different organizations and public companies like Moelis, and when you're giving advice, I mean, what are some of the things that you've learned, over the years that allow you to really be that, that incredible sort of guidance, or the person that sort of that whisperer that says, these are the types of things that you need to go do and to be successful.
I don't know how incredible I am, but I have been in the presence and taken guidance and instruction from um, some pretty good leaders along the way. Um, I mean, forget about youth coaches, which I think are very important, and my parents and all that sort of stuff. But to kind of zero in on sports personalities, the first actually, Billie Jean King was an employer of mine when I was a sophomore. She had this magazine called Women's Sport Magazine, based in San Mateo, California, and about the time I was having my epiphany that this sort of thing is not going to happen, there was a posting that said, "Come be an intern at Women's Sports Magazine." And I had a chance to meet her. Let's figure this is 1974. Meet her then husband. They were launching this magazine, this whole idea of women's sports just post Title IX. So seeing her interact and she's still this active athlete, kind of leading this space was one moment. Another moment that really sticks out to me. I was fortunate enough to work at a law firm that did a lot of sports work, and two people that are being honored now this year with by Sports Business Journal, Arn Tellum and Steve Greenberg, who've gone on to do these great things. Where Arn and I, especially, were just kids starting the firm. Steve was the guy that hired both of us, but in retrospect, to kind of know those guys as regular people, and our leader there was this guy Alan Rothenberg, and Alan was just a personality himself. Was then a young guy, late 30s, early 40s, and he's leading this powerhouse firm. So just observing him, that another big moment that I I have used as I began to lead places. I mean, all these people kind of filter into what you do. Um, but when I went to work at the LA Olympic Organizing Committee, Peter Ueberroth, I think we had 50 employees at the time, so I wasn't one of the first, but I was in the early phases of it. And I was determined to be successful there. And I would work all hours of the night, and I was really working. I was really kind of figure out. I ran the sport of boxing. I originally was a lawyer doing licensing agreements for the Olympic whatever, the sponsors and licensees. One night I was in there working late, and I see uh, Peter Ueberroth coming from his office past my cubicle, and I'm in a part of my mind is certainly thinking, okay, the boss is going to see me working late, and I'll say early on we had a lot of words later on, but early on the only words I got from him at that moment were "work smart, not long," and he kept walking. he I, so he's telling me, I'm thinking I'm going to impress the guy. He's like, why are you the only one here at this time of night? So people that, Bart Giamatti, I had a chance to work with him when I was working, especially on issues related to diversity and leadership in baseball. Fay Vincent, when he was commissioner, I had a chance to work with him as well, and to see how different people lead. I think it's important to, if you get these chances, to observe and really take in. I didn't do enough of it at the moment, to see how people lead, to see what applies to you. That we teach this leadership stuff at Wharton, and it's really important to, how do you lead, how do you continue to be yourself, but lead with some of the best examples that you've had along the way that actually fit with what you do.
So, what are some of those secrets, or some of those?
Well, the key with so much of this stuff ends up being, be yourself. It really that's the easiest thing to keep track of along the way. And I think in so many phases of life and business, that ends up being the rule. The idea of straightforwardness, honesty, integrity, uh, humility. There was I was on the board of an educational enterprise, and the leader of it, who wasn't, was a pretty successful business person, but nobody famous. He would, I remember he had a whole session on leading with humility. Um, that there was another guy that I met actually in that process. We were on the board together. I think the guy's name, Horst Schulze, who was one of the leaders, original founders, I guess, of Ritz Carlton at some point along the way. And he talked about, as a leader, making sure that you give both your employees and your customers experiences, that it's all about experiences, which is the space we're in society. This was maybe 20 25 years ago, but now it is this. Everybody talks about this idea of, how do you deliver experiences. And this was, when Ritz Carlton was in its heyday. He really had this kind of thinking, and it stuck with me too, that not only for whoever you're selling to, but for people that are working with you, the idea of experiences is much more important than tangible things that they can take away, the t-shirts and hats and that sort of thing.
What makes it sort of so satisfying for you, as you work with us and advise different companies and work with entrepreneurs and different people in the sports business world? What's the thing that really excites you about that and the opportunity, whether it's from a technology perspective or it's a new league or it's just a new idea within sports? What sort of fires you up about, working with these individuals?
Probably three big things. First is the variety, and when you and I started talking about working together, that was really one of the keys, was that the lack of insensitive phrasing, the deal flow that you see, and the opportunities that come through 76 are unparalleled in this kind of sports tech space, but it also expands outside of that, which provide a lot of advisory opportunities. So that's first is the variety. The second is, for me, I always have to be careful in a lot of ways. It's an extension of the teaching. It is an extension of the office hours. I mean, as a professor, the best professors, you know how to talk a lot, but you learn how to listen too, and you learn to figure out, somebody's coming to your office hours, you got other people lined up behind them. How do you give them what they need in an efficient space period of time, and then how do you also make it clear that they can come back for further guidance? So to me, the challenge is to absorb as much as you can in whatever period you have, and to provide advice. And the third is, just, it's sort of like you collect all, the Rolodex, whatever you collect over the years, is to actually be able to apply it, to actually be able to use it, to actually, um, we'll get somebody wants to start a new league, or they're trying to figure out, how do I go to market, or whatever it might be. And you suffer from the same thing as Mike and the rest of the team, is you've got all this knowledge you don't even know you have, and that's repetitive in some ways, in terms of, I've heard this problem before, let me help you based on what I know. And I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you based on my experience. I'm this additional employee that you can, take it or leave it, but I've got this background that should be helpful to the problem that you've had, and your only job is to explain to me as clearly as possible what it is I can do to be helpful. So for me, for this kind of phase in life, there's not much more that I can do that's exciting. Those are kind of the three basic elements, but the broad piece is, to help other people be successful. I mean, there's you started off asking about former students. I can't, I probably should try to more formally think about, the tree of people that are out there, and go to each of the leagues and think about people that I know. But I run into people now. I mean, I've run into people on Long Street in Cape Town, South Africa. I've run into people at airports in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. They'll say professor, so they're able to give me a clue that somebody was in a class of mine in one way or the other. Um, but I do not do a very good. So we didn't have all this. If we had some of the apps and things that we see now, I could attract everybody over the years. But now it's too late. There are people from 1986. I'm not going to remember their name until they work with me a little bit.
Well, is there a top student or person that did, come into the office hours at one point and sit down with Professor Shropshire and say, "I got this amazing idea," and you leaned in with them and helped them really develop it into something special?
That's like, favorite children, right? That's I mean, there have been, and I'll, probably get myself in trouble for even mentioning anybody's name, but there's so many people I think about, when that scene, um, of a student coming in, and years later, I hear from, there's a woman who's actually a lawyer here in Scottsdale, where I am now, who came in, and she says, I was 17 years old. My father gave me your book on sports agents. I wanted to be a sports agent. and I spent the whole morning trying to get myself together to mentally to come in to talk to you as this kid about being in this business. So that story repeats itself over and over and over again. Now I'm calling her for lawyer referrals and to send clients to her. So the story repeats itself over and over again about the different levels of engagement that I've had with students that have gone on to be successful. And the best cases are too when when they have these adult issues. Hey, I've started this company, or hey, I hear you're advising now, and they're appreciative of the time that I took back then, and they want some more of that. And they can drill down more than they could is I want to be a sports agent. Now it's okay, I've got this agency, I want to get acquired. Help me think about, what acquisition program would be best for my firm. That's, if there's I say that, and the one thing that I think about, and Mr. Relationship I'm talking to, but one of the first times when the light bulb really went off that was the case, that relationships are so important, not just in the manufactured kind of student professor case. One of the first big kind of advisory roles I had, and it was actually as a lawyer too, was with an old teammate at Stanford. And I had this inglorious playing career, but I made all these friends for playing for 4 years. And a buddy of mine, Ray Anderson, who actually went on to be the athletic director at Arizona State, he was an executive with the NFL. He had a sports agency for a number of years, and he was acquired by Octagon. But when Octagon first called him, he's like, I don't know what to do. I hadn't talked to him for years. I don't know what to do. I see you're doing all this stuff. Can you advise me in selling my life's work? This was, I don't know, 30 some years ago. But it was then that you start to realize that, there are times when these lifetime relationships turn into business. We remain the best of friends. So we sold that business, and then he worked. We had to do the deal for his contract with Octagon. Then he ended up working with the Falcons. We did that deal. He ended up working with the NFL. We did that deal. Then he ends up becoming athletic director at Arizona State. I'm negotiating with the president of Arizona State University, Michael Crow, and Michael Crow says, "What would it take to get you here?" And so I end up going to Arizona for 5 years based on this. Actually, it was more than he wasn't more than a teammate. This How far back does this go? Ray Anderson was my host when I was in the 11th grade when I went to visit Stanford. So he's a couple years ahead of me. So he was my host. So you just never know where these relationships are going to take you.
You really don't. That's an incredible story, and it just goes to show, like, if you do the right thing and you work with the right kinds of people and you help people, good things happen. And one of the things as we start to wrap up, Ken, I think one of the things that has been really fascinating to see is how you have worked with so many of the big leagues, like the NFL. Over the years, you've worked with them on a number of different programs, and really were did some of the financial and business things with these leagues for the first time. They ever done things like that, and you led that. What do you think we can do, or what these leagues could do together with us as we continue to build everything that we're doing here at 76 Capital?
We started doing the work, especially on the educational side, with the National Football League. It was they hadn't done a full-on program in terms of setting the table for athletes to figure out, what will I do after I stop playing, and what can I do now? So in a sense, it was a mini MBA, but it's a mini MBA that was tailored for athletes. And now there are a lot of those kinds of programs out there. I mean, from what we started at Wharton and now elsewhere. I think that the next level, and we've talked about this, is and there are some places that are starting to do it, but I think 76 is uniquely positioned to have a program, because the premier program that says, okay, how do you really evaluate these deals in an impartial setting, step by step? How do you figure out what to invest in, what not to invest in, um, and and then some other, because that's so much of a question all these guys have. And then now, I think when we started 2004, was the first time we did a program at Wharton. These guys weren't making the kind of money that they're making now. Now this whole idea of, and the investing part is one thing, but it's also what can you do with the rest of your life? Because as we know, the playing careers are short across the leagues, and even if you make it to 40, then you still got these years of life. So, and we talk to people like this all the time that make substantial amounts of money, and they're trying to figure out, well, what do I do with the rest of my life? Do I keep investing? How do I do it? And we can connect people with the right people to help make those kinds of decisions. And the earlier that people begin to have these conversations, and then with athletes, there's this athlete foreclosure kind of mindset of, I can't think of anything else while I'm playing. The best men and women in terms of being successful after sport. I mentioned Billie Jean King, who's one of the greatest. I mean, she changed the whole game while she's playing, and now she's in the business of changing the game. The athlete investors that are the best are the ones who found time while they were playing to learn about it. So I encourage athletes especially to think about, how do I parcel out the time to learn about the space that I'm going to be forced to be involved in some ways, if not while I'm playing afterwards, and I can begin to learn and make the right decisions. So 76 is a great place to think about learning that kind of work. And you've done a lot with a lot of great athletes all along the way, and athletes people don't know about, in terms of helping them to think through how to do this.
Absolutely. Well, Ken, as always, it's great to have you on our 76 Capital Sports Leadership Show. Can't wait to have you back soon. And this was a lot of fun, great conversation, and it's exciting, just to do, and all the things that we're doing together on a daily basis, and all the different companies and entrepreneurs and athletes, as you said, that we have the opportunity to meet with and talk with and advise, and really start to think about, like, how can we help really continue to build the sports industry to even greater heights than it is today.
Well, the great thing is, and to close out, if we can't help, we can get you to the right people. I mean, all business is not business for us, but we can help get you the right people, and that's part of, again, that's part of the whole relationship thing. That hopefully there'll be a time for you to come back to us at some later point. But the idea of having been in this business for so long, there aren't many people that we don't know.
That is true. That is true. Again, as you said, it's about being there. It's about being in the mix, and that's what we do here at 76 Capital. And it's great to have you as part of all that. And thanks for joining us on the show today.
Thanks, Wayne.
On behalf of the entire 76 Capital team, thank you for joining us for this edition of our Sports Leadership Show. Please remember to subscribe to our show on your favorite podcast network or on the 76 Capital website. You can also explore the hundreds of episodes we've produced over the past several years on those same networks. And as always, go out there and make it happen.